Kanda Kra, Mike, good morning. Good morning, Mike. Hope you had a wonderful week. Happy Gnosis. Good morning, sweetheart. I hope you are doing great. You had a pleasant week. Jude, good morning. Welcome to this morning's coffee brew to all three of you. I hope that you had a great week, Jude. Give it about another couple minutes here, and then we'll get this going. All good, darling. How are you? I'm doing great. Francie, good morning. Welcome to this morning's coffee brew, Francie and Inner Peas. Good morning as well. I hope you both had a pleasant week. Oh, I'm doing good, Jude. From Naples, Florida. Naples is a pretty area. I've been there before. Last time I was there was 1989. Last time I was there, so it's been a while. I had an uncle who originally he lived in Key West. Then he moved to a couple other places in Florida, but now he lives outside of the closest town to where he's at now is Boston. He works for thermodynamics. He is a quality control inspector or something like that for thermodynamics. Good morning, Cement. Welcome to this morning's coffee brew. I hope you had a wonderful week. Give it another 30 seconds here and we'll get this party started. It's so much money and they are building so many homes. Yeah. Well, it was a pretty big boom back then. Yeah, for homes. The problem was the quality control of the actual homes that they were being built. All right, let's get this going, ladies and gentlemen. This is morning coffee brew. Condemned to die. We're going to answer the following in this stream this morning. Who carries out the death penalty here in the United States? Who restricts the condemned to die? Cost of the death penalty, the appeals process, not so much the process itself, but we're going to take a look at the appeals. Violence on death row, who's milking the system, and little known facts about capital punishment is what we're going to go through this morning. Before we get started, it doesn't matter if you are for the death penalty or against it. We are looking at the actual facts. I have done my due diligence to confirm every single part of this stream. 3 months I've worked on this topic. Trust me when I say a lot of this is not publicly known, and it's known only by the families and the people who have been put to death and their attorneys, along with those that fight for the civil rights and human rights for the condemned. All right, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Walk away now. If you tend to not be able to take all newsworthy content with an open mind, I'm not joking. If the comment section keeps going the way it has been, I will turn off the actual comments during the actual live streams on certain topics, especially those that are hot button topics, supposedly. The last 2 weeks, me and my moderators have flagged over 400 comments that were left in the comment section. People razzing on other people in the comment section. It's not needed here. It's not needed anywhere. Comments that were demeaning towards me or towards other people. I'm not going to stand for it. So I will turn off comments in the future on live streams. Not the comment section you have right now, but the comment section afterwards. If this is the way it's going to go for from here on out, and we're doing our best to keep them the comments clean, so you don't see them. And yeah, if you don't see them, that's good. That's my entire intention, is to make sure that everyone who is here right now is not having to be bombarded by these. I don't want to call them trolls. Some of them have good intentions. They just don't like what I have to say, or they think that I am one political party over another, which I'm not. Death row in your final days. 27 states in the U.S. have an active policy to use the death penalty. Every branch of the U.S. military has an active policy to use the death penalty, along with the U.S. government. This is federal, on the federal level, has an active and lawful order from Congress to use the death penalty. It's not just the states that execute. We had a moratorium on the death penalty for the military and for on the federal level. But when Trump was in office, I'm not bashing on the man. I'm just stating the facts. He resumed the death penalty for military and for the U.S. government for federal crimes. And he quickly rushed through almost a half dozen people through the system who were, had no death date at all, and rushed them through and had them executed at the federal level. But there is currently a lawful order to execute, at state and federal in military. Those 27 states are the following. They have an active policy to, execute the condemned: Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, I'm going to bring myself back up on full screen here just for a second. All right. When it comes to active policies to condemn, of those 27 states, you may notice that there are one or two states that people believe that there is a moratorium and they are not actively using the death penalty. Or maybe they're like the state of Utah or Idaho that haven't used the death penalty in maybe 30 years. That is not a moratorium. It's the inmate themselves who are condemned to die. Their appeals process has taken this long for the next person, with the death. Maybe they were supposed to be executed in 2020, but because of COVID and delays in the court system and backlog, it has pushed it out even further to 2024 and beyond before they'll ever be executed, even if they had a death date in 2020. Likewise, just because there is a governor of a state of those 27 who has publicly said that they are against the death penalty, it doesn't mean that there is a lawful order that has been signed by the governor in a couple of those states that puts a moratorium, an actual legal moratorium in place so the death penalty cannot be used. Of those 27 states, there is nothing at all on the law, on the books, that stops them from being able to use the death penalty. Likewise, at the same time, additionally, so you have the 27 states that I just read off. The federal government, the U.S. government, can execute an inmate at the federal level in a prison if there's a federal prison in that state. State law does not, and a moratorium or an abolishment of the death penalty does not trump the federal level. The feds can actually overrule the death penalty on the state level. So, and we'll give you an example. Let's say that Biden tomorrow decides that there's an inmate in a state that does not have the death penalty, let's say Washington State. And that person was so egregious in their acts and everything else that they want to execute that individual. The federal government cannot make the state execute that inmate, but they can transfer that inmate to the federal level if they can prove in court that the inmate committed federal crimes. And then once they get them into the federal system, they can then execute them in another state because there is no federal prison in Washington State that has the ability to carry it out. Maybe they move that inmate to Idaho and then they execute them there. But there are workarounds. So even if the state hasn't abolished, they've abolished the death penalty like Washington State, they can move that inmate into the federal system and then move them to another state and then execute them. So when it comes to the death penalty, there is no safe place anywhere in the U.S. And if you committed a crime where you moved a victim over a state line, or the victim was from another state, it's easy to prove in federal court that you have now created a federal crime. All right. So back to the information. Questions: which state has restricted the death row inmates in their final days and up to 60 days before execution? The answer is every single one of the 27 states. And I'm going to go through some of the ways that they restrict the access and the rights of an individual while they are on death row, and particularly the last 60 days leading up to the actual date of execution. How are they restricting them? Limited access to health services. An inmate within the last 60 days before execution, they will not do any kind of medical procedure for the inmate unless it is medically necessary in order to keep them alive and so they can then execute them. As cold and as gruesome as that it may sound, like let's say we have an inmate in the state of Texas who actively used the death penalty a lot, and Joe is on death row, and we know he needs dialysis. They will make that individual go through dialysis, even if they have to get a court order to make sure that that individual has access to dialysis to keep them alive, just so they can execute them. Let's say that the same inmate has has bone spurs or something else that makes his quality of life less than desirable. Maybe he has a hernia. They won't let them in the last 60 days before execution have that medically treated because they're going to not want to waste the actual services on someone who is going to die. They keep them and their appointments. They just move them to the back of the list. And all other inmates, again, will get their appointments before the one is going to come up for execution first. Additionally, they restrict them from access to the commissary unless it is a perishable item that can be consumed and used up within the last 60 days. They stop them from being able to buy things on the commissary. Maybe it's a television or an MP3 music player, or it's new tennis shoes, whatever. If it cannot be consumed and used up completely in the last 60 days of their life before they they're put to death, they do not allow them any longer in the last 60 days to be able to purchase those things from commissary. Reduction of outdoor activities. All right, now, not in every single state, but most death rows in the state, those 27 states that have the active death penalty, they are a lockdown 23-1. They're locked down in their cell 23 hours a day, 1 hour a day. They have the ability either to go outside or they can use the shower, whatever they need to do for that in that 1 hour. And it's one-on-one. When they go outside in those 27 states, they don't let them mingle with other death row inmates, like in an open, courtyard. They are put into a cage, or they have a specialized location with concrete walls that are 30 feet high, and wire over the top of it, so they can't, even if they were to able to somehow get up a 30-foot concrete wall, they can't get out onto the roof of the place. But they start restricting their actual access to the outside, and they say, well, instead of going outside and walking around in a circle, which you could do in your cell, how about we just say only that you can have access to the shower, and that's it. And this, in the last 60 days before they condemn them, they start putting more and more restrictions on them in that way. Additionally, along with health services, medical services, they stop them from being able to have mental health services is the next one on the list. They start restricting them, and they don't necessarily go in order. Like tomorrow, they start restricting their visitation, and then the next day it's medical, then it's mental health. These are just a grouping of things that they do. All 27 states do this now. It's not one state does it and the other states don't. It's all 27. Excuse me. But they stop restricting them, for mental health services, and allowing them to book or have more mental health services. Maybe they've been in therapy for the last, for 30 minutes every day for 2 years because, well, they're not criminally insane, but they're having a mental health crisis. Well, they start restricting the access to mental health. You can't go to group anymore. You can't go to one-on-one individual therapies anymore. You can't have mental health services because we're going to kill you in less than 2 months. Next is tighter restrictions on visitation and who may visit the condemned. They keep it open to allowing family members, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. They are always going to be somewhat allowed to it unless they have a criminal history themselves. They start to look at the actual visitation. Okay, you've been approved to visit this condemned inmate, but in the last 60 days, if you are have a criminal history, it could be something as simple as a DUI in some states. And they say, look, you have a criminal conviction here. You are not allowed to visit in person anymore to that condemned inmate. If you want to have, connection with them, you can talk to them on the phone or via, the prison computer system. But they start to restrict their access to actual visitors from family and friends. They never restrict the access to attorneys, because you'd be automatically giving that inmate avenues to another appeal immediately. More, they stop all in-person religious services. Maybe during that 1 hour, they have free outside of their cell, they have been going to, and instead of going to the yard, maybe they went to the chapel and they got communion, or they went to, and had a prayer session with whatever faith base they may belong to. In the last 60 days, they stop all religious services where that death row inmate will go to an actual place and have services. They instead make the preacher, the Muslim leader, whoever whoever it might be, for whatever religion, they make them come to their actual door and have services and prayers with them at their actual cell door, as opposed to them going to someplace. They stop that. And then comes the restrictions of phone services, along with mail and the use of the tablet. So I'm going to talk about all three of those together: mail, phone, and phone services. Instead of being able to use the phone for endless periods of time, for maybe 25 minutes or your 30 minutes outside your cell, or for the whole hour, they said, okay, you now only get to use the phone once or twice a week, and that's it. No more endless phone calls to anyone. Now, that is not, again, all of that, mail services, the use of the tablets for the internet and for the phone, none of that is a reduction for access to their legal services. When it comes to, again, they would be handing them an automatic appeal and a stay of the execution if they did anything to legally stop them access to their attorneys. But they'll restrict every other avenue that they can. Reduction of meals. Now, this what I'm talking about here is the different types of food. Let's look at Monday through Friday, that 5 days a week. Maybe for breakfast, one day they have oats, as their main thing, and bread, or whatever their last, on that tray. And the next day it's, stale, pancakes that were made in a factory that got discarded because they're past their expiration date. Oh, the food sucks. Trust me. They do not eat better in prison than, in meals that are served to them than, a homeless person will get, or a veteran will get. I hear that all the time, that veterans, who are homeless are getting less care than people who are on death row, or in prison. It's not true. The food that is served in prisons is absolute crap. And it's made that way on purpose because they want to keep costs to the bare minimum. And the person who is homeless, unfortunately, is homeless, and we should never have a homeless veteran. But they're getting food and access to food, a lot better and fresh quality as opposed to those who are in prisons. If you've ever seen a YouTube channel that has talked about, prison life, listen to these people and in the stories of the food that they are actually making, preparing, and serving to their fellow inmates. This is why theft is so high within the actual prison, and why they get together and everybody brings something and they make a combined meal called a swole. And they do that because that is so much more nutritious than the shit that they feed them in every single day throughout the week. But they will restrict it from 5 different meals, maybe down to 2 different ones, and then repeat that over and over again throughout the last 60 days of, before they're condemned. Additionally, prolonged isolation without speaking to another person, especially fellow death row inmates. In the last 60 days, when it comes to the 27 states that have the death penalty and actively use the death penalty, of the 27 states, 24 of them have a system in place where they have death row, so picture this, there's a series of cells, one by one next to each other. All right, that is death row. They may have solid metal doors, and a slot that is just for, cuffing up, that they must stick their hands through behind their backs when they leave the cell, and then put leg braces on so they're not at risk to harm any guards or anybody else. They might have a slot for that, and they may have a slot where they get their meals, sent into them on a tray. Others have metal bars like you would see in a jail or an old-timey jail. All right. Or it could have a plexiglass door in the same 2 slots. Though 24 of the 27 states, in the last 60 days before the inmate is put to death, they move them to an isolated section next to the actual death chamber. Maybe it used to be, next to the gas chamber. The gas chamber is pretty much defunct now in every one of the 27 states. But they move them to another area that is closer to where they're actually being put to death. And it's an individual cell that only has a bed, a small desk, a toilet, and sink that is a combination, or they may be two separate items next to each other. But that's it. And they are on watch 24 hours a day by guards and by security in that last 60 days before they're executed. Now, there is a federal statute that's called Rule 43. U.S. Department of Justice and federal prisons shall not subject an inmate to indefinite or prolonged solitary confinement. That is what Rule 43 is. Now, there's a loophole to that. The loophole is there is no definition of what prolonged is or what solitary is. And it's up to the individual states, the federal government, and the military to decide what is considered prolonged and what is considered solitary. Again, they move them to a section that is, next to where they're going to be executed, that last, part of their lives. Is that definition of solitary, or is it not solitary because they're able to see a guard watching them? So therefore, they've cut off communication with other death row inmates, but they're still able to communicate or see another individual. And what is considered prolonged? That varies from state to state. Some say no more than 14 days of confinement, solitary confinement. That would anything more than that would be prolonged. Other states say no, anything more than 7 days would be considered prolonged. And while others don't ever, have anything on their state books at all that actually give a definition of what solitary is or, what prolonged is. In case you're wondering, at the federal level for the U.S. military, there is zero definition at all for the military for how long someone can be in solitary confinement. There have been inmates who have served their entire sentence they were prosecuted on in military court and given a death sentence, and they spent their entire time in solitary confinement, where they only saw the person bringing them their food. They didn't see another guard. They didn't see another inmate. They didn't hear another inmate. Nothing. Their entire existence until they either died of natural causes or they were put to death. And the federal level, we've had inmates who have done 30 to 35 years and the federal level in solitary confinement with no ability to talk to other inmates or to guards. The only person they saw is just that person bringing them their food, and or if they ever got to see an attorney, and that's it. Now, again, that's the federal level, not the state level. We've had people who've served 30, 40 years on on death row, but we've never put them into solitary confinement for that entire period of time. When it comes to restricting access to inmates, they almost never restrict access to their appeals team of lawyers. Family, friends, and associates restricting the attorney is just asking for a stay of execution, like I pointed out earlier. Which states have violated the condemned inmates' civil rights the most? Mississippi, California, Louisiana, Texas, Ohio, and Nebraska, according to the Department of Justice. In case you can't read that, that's what the small print at the bottom is. I'm giving you the source for where each and every who has violated the civil rights of the inmate the most, and those are the states that have. Which states have made honest reforms to improve the condemned inmates' life and access to services? Those are California, Idaho, and Utah, according to the Department of Justice and the SPLC, which stands for the Southern Poverty Law Center. SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. They've made the most improvements to give the access to the inmate before they die and removing restrictions on the last 60 days. California, Idaho, and Utah. Not that there's a good state to be on death row, but which states are rated the best by legal scholars and civil rights lawyers? North Carolina and Florida. Again, according to the Department of Justice and the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC. Violence happens even on death row. How many inmates have been murdered behind bars while on death row since 1980? That is 13 inmates have died directly of stabbings or beatings, while 17 others have died from complications of their attacks later on. Eight of the states who have death row penalty do not report how an inmate dies or is killed, other than the report that they have died. It's up to the news and we you would call investigative journalism to find out how an inmate died. Those 8 states just say it's an open investigation. They won't tell you we had these 3 inmates attack this death row inmate and they killed him in the shower. They won't tell you any of that. It's up to somebody to file a Freedom of Information Act request, and it just like all of this. That's why it took 3 months to put all this together. It's because they don't want to talk about it to any of this stuff to the media at all. Anyone. I had to reach out to friends and family, who had inmate, family members, executed. And do they want to, dig up the past? Oh, my dad or my uncle or my cousin or whoever it was executed. They don't want to talk about that necessarily. They want to, hey, let's talk about the good things about their lives, and the lawyers are more than happy to talk about it because they're hoping that some kind of reform comes down. Who are some of those inmates who were beaten or stabbed or both that died because of the attack while on death row in the U.S. since 1980? The following: Billy Chimmer, Robert the Mudman Simons, Edwin Caprat, Donald Leroy Evans, Lauren Williams, Donald Harvey, and Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, there's an asterisk next to Donald Harvey's name because Donald Harvey was awaiting a sentence. He was housed on death row, but he wasn't technically a death row inmate. He had several life sentences that he was serving, but he was awaiting the actual sentencing on his final case when he was actually attacked and killed. Good luck, Chad Daybell. In case you're not familiar, Chad Daybell received the death penalty in the state of Idaho. So good luck, Chad. What are the costs of putting someone to death in any U.S. state, not counting the U.S. government or the military? The state, the trial to put someone to death will cost between $490,000 and $1.5 million. Then comes the appeals, $375,000 to $2.8 million. These are the averages, ladies and gentlemen. That should be not hose, but house. House an inmate, $1.5 million to $2.4 million. What are the costs to the defense? The trial will cost between $390,000 to $2.25 million. The appeals process will cost between $690,000 to $3.8 million to appeal a death sentence. Now, these are averages. There have been cases where the trial has cost well excess of $25 million to the state. The appeals process has cost over $5 million to house an inmate who is, had to be sent to Pelican Bay or to, a higher security, prison. The house an inmate obviously would be higher in one area versus another area. But the defense, again, Chad Daybell's, the estimation of Chad Daybell's trial for his, to fight the actual death penalty there in the entire trial, it's believed that his cost to Mr. Pryor is in excess of $700,000 is what the total legal bill would be to Mr. Pryor. And how is Mr. Pryor going to get paid? He put a lien on Chad Daybell's property, the house, the farm, everything, and all of their assets. Now, none of that can be sold off to pay off the insurance fraud that he collected for killing Tammy, that would be completely separate. And the insurance company already knows they're not going to get that money back. They might be able to crawl back about 500,000 of that if they're lucky, but the rest of that money, is never going to be, brought back to the insurance company, and they'll write it off on their taxes as a loss. But if there was anything else that was asset, wise, they would be next in line after Mr. Pryor. But Mr. Pryor is first. The family actually comes in number 4, but and he could have structured his assets in a way where he could have protected more for his kids, but he didn't. And I don't think they really want anything from Daddy other than to see Daddy rise to the Messiah level in the LDS church. On average, an inmate who has been given a death sentence will file 26 motions to appeal their sentence. That is an average. There have been some who have filed upwards of 29 to 50 of different avenues to appeal. And once they've exhausted all of their appeals, their ability to file an appeal, only then can they actually be executed. Or they have the right at some point, they can sign what's called a declaration of death. That means that they will not fight anything else and they are giving up. And there have been some inmates who have said, all right, I went this avenue for appeals. I'm not going to win. Those were my best chances. I will sign the declaration of death, and thusly giving up any type of appeals, and you can now put me to death. Because at least then they know when they're going to die, because they must give them an actual death date. And that is on a piece of paper that they can pin up on their wall in their cell and know, I've got 1,000 days until I'm going to die, or I have 374 days, or whatever it might be. And they can look at that and they know exactly when the actual end is going to come. But, and while others will fight the appeal forever, the average appeals process for someone who has been given a death row sentence, like Chad Daybell, will take upwards of 28 years in the state level. Now, before Trump reinstated the death penalty at the federal and military level, every one of those inmates were just in limbo forever. None of them had an actual death date. And so they just kind of it's life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, additionally, here in Washington State, where I live, Governor Inslee abolished the death penalty in the state. Every single inmate who was on death row at that exact moment that he signed the abolishment of the death penalty in Washington State were automatically reverted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So there were, I think, 40 inmates who in Washington State were on death row at that point. Don't quote me on the number of 40. I think it was approximately 40. It might have been 38 or 41. It was right in there. But they all became life in prison without the possibility of parole, which then gave them another option to file an appeal to try to get resentenced. So maybe they only have to do 300 years, and they can waste the taxpayers' money and file an appeal on that ground. Okay, well, you get 300 years and the possibility of parole now. Thank you for wasting our time and the taxpayers' money. And again, when it comes back to the federal level and to the state level, who pays all that money? We do, the taxpayers. When there's an indigent individual like Lori Vallow, we foot that bill. The people of the state where she was convicted in Idaho, they will foot the bill for everything that she has to go. She went through her legal services because she couldn't afford legal services. The taxpayers pick up that. Now she's in Arizona where she doesn't have the option of death penalty unless they can actually prove extenuating circumstances there. And that would be money transferring from her hand to Alex's hand, her brother, who ended up killing Charles. If they can prove that aspect of it, that would be an extenuating circumstance, and then they could go after her for the death penalty in Arizona. So, but all that trial, her defense, the state's prosecution, the individuals who live in the state of Arizona will pick up that bill as well. All right, next. Additional facts about capital punishment. No state that has ever used a capital punishment has seen a decrease in violent crime rates. That's an honest fact that a lot of people don't understand about the death penalty. And one of the main things that every person who is against the death penalty should stand up on their soapbox and scream. Every state, the state of Texas, let's use them as an example because they use the death penalty the most, not because I want to pick on them. But in the state of Texas, since they have actively used the death penalty, they have not seen any decline in actual violent crimes anywhere in the state. Homicide rates have pretty much flattened out. They haven't gone down, they haven't spiked up, but they've kind of flattened out. And those who are for the death penalty say this is why they flattened out. It's because of we have the death penalty and we use it. What is even more alarming is in the state of Texas, if one of the other states that surround or border the state of Texas was to abolish the death penalty or not have the death penalty, you will see an increase in violent crimes across the border into those states. This is a factual thing, ladies and gentlemen. This is not my opinion. The Department of Justice has studied the death penalty since the 1960s, long before they had the moratorium in 1976 on all death penalties. They had studied it for over 16 years. They knew what was effective. They knew what was working. They knew how to keep violent crime down, and yet almost no state has ever done anything that has been recommended by the Department of Justice from that point on to decrease violent crime. Most prisoners condemned to die will actually die of natural causes before being executed. Yet it costs 17 times more just to watch them die just as fast. 17 times more to have someone on death row. Why is it more expensive to have someone on death row and watch them slowly die as opposed to being, in, a segregation, housing unit or a general population or protective custody? Because they have to have guards watching them 24 hours a day. And there's more people that are needed to be paid to bring them their food, to check them, to do cell searches, everything. More, they don't just one person moving a death row inmate. It's always a minimum of 2 individuals who move a death row inmate. Sometimes 3. Most of the time, most states, they want 3 people when it comes to moving a death row inmate. 1 on each side and 1 from behind, who will help move an inmate from one point to another. Transportation costs are higher. Moving them to a county jail if they have to go to court or federal court or whatever it might be. The costs are, again, 17 times more expensive to put and watch someone slowly die on death row as to any other section of the prison. Who has lived on death row the longest? This is the current winner. If you can hand someone a trophy for being on death row the longest, Thomas Eugene Creech, in the state of Idaho, has been in prison for 51 years as of June 1st of 2024. 40 years now he has been on death row, the same exact prison where Chad Daybell is most likely going to be sent. I shouldn't say where he'll be sent, but it's most likely. We won't know the final location of where Chad will be until after he has 100% been moved. Just because they send him someplace, he gets a new prison ID where he's smiling, and that is factual. It doesn't mean he's going to stay there. That could just be the processing center for where he is. It doesn't mean that's his forever home. He's most likely going to end up at Kuna, the maximum security prison where Thomas Eugene Creech is. In February of 2024, Creech execution was halted after 3 doctors were unable to find a useful vein to carry out his execution. His sentence was then commuted to life in prison without any chance at parole. He is, however, still on death row and cannot walk without a walker or aid from someone else. He is also in stage 1 of liver failure. This happened in January of 2024. They tried to execute Mr. Creech, but they couldn't. 3 different doctors could not find a useful vein to execute him. Why? Because Creech was a massive heroin addict and other drugs, and he shot them up through his veins, and he blew out his veins or destroyed his veins over all the years before he ended up in prison. But his veins, they could not find a useful vein. They need 2 veins to actually execute him, or a primary one where all the drugs that'll kill him will go in, and a backup. They have to have a backup port that where in case like the first one collapses or doesn't work. But they're unable to find one. But he is still on death row in Idaho. What's going to happen? He will eventually be moved to a protective custody unit or the state infirmary because he is again in stage 1 liver failure on top of it all. Little known facts about capital punishment. Capital punishment is overwhelmingly been carried out against African Americans over any other race. It's almost a 3-to-1. During the 18th and 19th century, capital punishment was carried out at a rate of 30 times the rate of the 20th and 21st century. In 1848, the first country to outlaw capital punishment was San Marino. Violent crime fell 60% in the next 30 years. You might be wondering why. That San Marino, and they are in the Department of Justice's actual study on the death penalty. What did they do to actually see a 60% decrease in violent crime over the next 30 years after abolishing the death penalty? They implemented early childhood education, early nutrition services for all children. Didn't matter who you were, you got fed, you got treated just like the person who had the access to everything. They started a process then to look at and take care of and uplift people out of poverty, not handing them a check, or an EBT card. Again, this is 1848, but a welfare card, and it said, "Here, go spend this on whatever." They said, "Come to us, and we will provide the basic necessities of life for you, so you can live a better quality of life, so you don't have to commit crimes later on in life, or your children, have to, become criminals as well." 44 inmates have been executed who had here in the United States, who had a total IQ score of less than a 12-year-old. Additionally, in the United States, on top of that, we've had 2 inmates in particular who very well documented, who had mental health issues, and they had learning disabilities where they may not have even known what was going on. One of those inmates, actually didn't eat his cinnamon roll, part of his last meal. And when the guard asked him, "Well, come on, finish your cinnamon roll, and before we execute you," he told the guards he was going to save it because when he came back later, he wanted to eat the cinnamon roll. He had no idea that he was about to be executed. He had no idea what the actual, and the right and wrong was. But they executed them all the same. And that's happened here in the United States. Capital punishment in the U.S. has been carried out since the first arrival of newcomers in the U.S. from the Mayflower. One of the first inmates and murders that took place was an individual who came over on the Mayflower, killed another passenger on the Mayflower here in the United States, not on the actual Mayflower itself, in the first colony. And he was the first, at first to be executed. He was hung, and then he was shot, just to make damn sure he was dead. But history kind of skims over that entire thing about him. Capital punishment surged during the Jim Crow era in the U.S., and more than 300,000, that is an estimate, people of color were executed for nonviolent crimes during that era. 300,000 is the estimate. Now that is mainly, in the southern states, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, as far in as north as New York. But at the same time, these states, a lot of people just got lynched and they weren't even accused of a crime. But at 300,000 is the estimate of those who committed a crime. Again, a crime during that period could be anything from leering at a white woman. That was an offense that people could lynch you for, or execute you for leering, or maybe you touched a white woman. There was, I don't want to get into it too much, but otherwise, but just say that the 300,000, I think, is an understatement of total number. States that have actively used capital punishment sentence have never seen a drop of more than 2% in violent crime. And this is not what I was talking about before, but this is when the day that they have put into effect, okay, we're going to start using the death penalty. In the immediate time afterwards, they've never seen more than a 2% drop before it comes right back up to the same level again, like in the example I gave of the state of Texas. Oh, it dipped. Look, hey, look, that's what people, who are for the death penalty look at. It dipped. We're getting somewhere. People are not violent. Then right back up to the same level it was, and it levels out again until the next time, and then maybe another, less than 2% dip again. 85% of all appeals are filed and granted delays by those who are Caucasian. That take every other ethnicity out there besides Caucasian, but 85% of all the appeals that are granted any type of delays are for those who are of Caucasian. 53% of all the final executions are carried out are against African Americans. 17% of all African Americans are afforded the same access to DNA appeals lawyers and than of those as Caucasian. Only one woman has been executed since 1976 in America. Legally, I need to keep on adding, and that was Elaine Wuornos. While there are 41 women as of the 1st of June 2024 on death row. There are 41 women on death row. The death penalty was reinstated in 1976 after the U.S. Supreme Court heard the case from 1972 of Furman versus Georgia. There have been 1,513 successful executions in the U.S. This goes from the beginning of the actual establishment of the death penalty to now. Not 1,500 since 1976, but 1,513 total. There have been 6 unsuccessful executions or cases that were halted midway through, where either the system that they were using to execute them failed, or there was something happened. They went through with the entire thing, like lethal injection or electrocution or the gas chamber, and the inmate lived. Now, contrary to popular belief, those who are given a death sentence and go through the actual process of being executed, and they live. They survive somehow through lethal injection or electrocution. They don't necessarily get a free right to go home. In Hollywood, they seem to like the idea of, hey, look, Frank was put in the electric chair. They strapped him in old Sparky, and he lived through it. He didn't just live through it once. They did it 3 times, and he survived. Well, I guess Frank gets to go home now. That's not true. There have been 2 cases where they have then released the individual in short order after that, a botched execution. But in all the other ones, they just commute them to life in prison and then watch them slowly die. There have been one execution stopped because the inmate was too fat to be hung. That took place in Washington State. He ate himself and gorged himself on as much food as possible until he got to over the weight maximum for to be hung in Washington State. And they said, okay, well, we'll have to go to court now. And I'm not joking about this. And they went to court and actually got the state, the courts to agree. We can put him on a fasting diet, not starve him to death, but make him lose weight so he drops below the maximum, and then we can hang him. Or we need to change the actual type of method of actual execution. But at the time, the only option was, and once they gave you death by hanging, that's how they did it. You didn't have a backup plan. You may have had other ones that you offered, like firing squad or electric chair or gas chamber. They may have had those options, but once they gave you one, like hanging, that's how you had to die. And why were they worried about that? Because of cruel and unusual punishment. If they would have hung him at his current weight, when he dropped through the floor, it would have taken his effing head right off of his body. And that would have been cruel and unusual for the witnesses to watch someone be decapitated. Yeah, I know. We had the guillotine, and the guillotine took the head off an individual. But here in the West, we said, nope, no guillotines. These are the options you have for executing the state, the legislators, and everybody agreed this is how we're going to do it. Now, that's all a mute point because now in Washington State, the governor, like I said, Governor Inslee, Jay Inslee, abolished the death penalty. So there will never be a death penalty in Washington State ever again, unless by some sake of a miracle, the whole new swath of people come into political power and are able to change it. When those states who have the death penalty, they use it, or they try to use it, but they're all having problems with the same thing. Nobody can get the phenobarbital for lethal injections. So, like in the state of Idaho, if they don't have phenobarbital to execute Chad Daybell, Chad Daybell's next option is they will immediately go to a firing squad. That is the next option in the state of Idaho. Since 1976, there have been 176 exonerations of inmates from death row. 63 of those inmates were within 60 days of execution. Each of these inmates were exonerated because of DNA and additional evidence that was withheld from the defense during the trial. Wrap your head around that one, ladies and gentlemen. 63 men were on death row, and within 2 months of actually being executed from, for crimes that they didn't commit, DNA and additional evidence that was withheld from their defense proved their innocence. Since 1976, the United States has executed 6 inmates who were proven innocent after they were executed, and 2 federal inmates at the same time. From 1976 to now, were proven to be innocent of their charges, after they were actually executed. Thank you for watching. I know. And I got through it in just about 1 hour. I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to, read the comments or see, beautiful mess. Good morning, welcome. I'm sure I missed a lot of people in their comments. Again, I don't care if you're for the death penalty or against it. Everybody has that right. If you think an eye for an eye is wrong, it's wrong. That's your morality. Now we can't change the fact that the states use the death penalty, but we need to know exactly what is happening behind those doors. Once Chad Daybell gets to death row, what's going to happen? Violent crime is very rampant in prison, and so is other crimes like theft. Look at what happened to good old Christopher Watts, and Dodge Correction Center. Did you think that his underwear and his personal belongings ended up in another inmate's cell because Chris gave them to him? Or do you think maybe the more likelihood is that inmate either stole them from Chris, or Chris paid off a debt, or gave him those items for protection? It happens all the time in prison. Just because we lock them up behind a wall doesn't mean crime stops or the criminal stops. Trivia nominations. Lisa Montgomery is on the list. I already know that one. I gotta find my list. Where's my book? There's my book. My little black book. I will definitely write it down. What is it? Christa. Pike and Jeffrey. Gotta go. Made into the party. Thank you, Will and Mod. So, Kitaku, you have a great one. Don't forget, tomorrow's trivia is on Charles Edmund Cullen. Charles Edmund Cullen, otherwise known as the Angel of Death. The Angel of Death, but Charles Edmund Cullen is tomorrow's trivia. How many millions did the U.S. government pay those families whose innocent loved ones were executed? Nothing. And that's a bittersweet pill. Not all states. So let's just say, I'll use Texas as an example, because again, Texas is very open when it comes to the death penalty or imprisonment. Let's say you're in Texas, or you and your loved ones live in the state of Texas, and your Uncle Bobby gets arrested and charged with a murder. He's convicted of that murder. He's sent to prison, and he has always maintained his innocence. And say 20 years later, we find out the actual truth, DNA and other evidence on top of it, because not every state exonerates an individual just because you have DNA evidence that proves that they didn't do it. But in some states you have to have additional thing on top of the DNA. But let's just say 20 years later, they proved that individual didn't commit that crime. The state doesn't have to pay that individual a dime. It is up to that individual and their family to sue the state for the false imprisonment. Now, there are other states, though, at the same time, that make an inmate, they force them to have savings accounts. Let's just say you got a 37-year sentence in the state of Texas, using them as an example again, or in the state of Florida. Florida's an even better example for this one. Let's say in the state of Florida, you get a 37-year sentence. You're now 93 years old, and they release you from prison. On your the 93 years you've sent, you get out, you will have a savings account with $1,000 in it that you have paid into through your prison work, and money that has come in. They take 10%. from your inmate account every time someone makes. So someone makes $100 donation, they take $10 and they throw it into that automatic forced savings account. So when you get out, you have a debit card with $1,000 on it. And then the state will give you a voucher, a prepaid like Visa card, where you can go get yourself a meal and you can get yourself maybe a motel room for the night. And that's it. And again, use the example that, in the state of Florida, that individual was wrongfully convicted and they served all those years. They didn't have to sue the state. And some states actually have laws in place that stop them from being sued. And they say, no, we don't have to pay you anything for all the time that you were in prison for being wrongfully convicted. Likewise, at the same time, say that individual is in prison and the evidence comes forward in DNA or other evidence that exonerates the individual, the state does not. In a lot of those 27 states, and I use that as, and I say a lot, and I don't know the actual number. I think it's 20 of the 27 states that do not have to release that individual right away. They have to have a court hearing, and that court hearing might come up this year. Maybe it'll come up next year to release you. The evidence proved that you were innocent. You've been wrongfully convicted. You're behind bars on death row or wherever you are in the system, and that you've been exonerated. We don't have to just open the door and say, go home. There are states, 20 of them, I believe, that say, nope, you must go to court. The judge must sign off and say that we are sorry about what happened to you. And then we have to set a release date from that day. It's not going to be that day. You're not going to have the cool camera thing where the media is going to be outside to chastise the state for wrongfully convicting this individual. It does happen sometimes. Maybe you'll have the attorneys there, the inmate, who's automatically going to say, well, people's going to ask them, what does it feel like to be free? Those individuals will, they're going to say, I can't believe that, justice has finally been done. Same thing it's going to be said every time because it's true. Will, did you see my other two nominations? No, I didn't. I did not see them, Cement Shoes. Thank you. Thank you for putting them up again. Let's see. M-A-R. Markeith? Is that how you pronounce that? Markeith Lloyd? I'm not familiar with that one. Dr. Anthony Garcia. I see a lot of expenses on that, explicits on that mug. Yeah, this is my wife's. It's my wife's mug. I can't find my mugs. I only have like 2 coffee mugs that I use, and I can't find them. They're not here in my studio. I wanted a cup of coffee this morning. No, I'm familiar who with Dr. Garcia is, but she used to have this at her work where she was I can't remember what her actual position was, but she worked in a pathology laboratory, and while she was going to school, getting her degree in psychology, but she don't work there anymore. She now works for the federal government. Markeith Lloyd. Wow, he sounds like a real winner, Cement Shoes. In Florida. You've heard how much I swear in my videos, Will. I love watching your content, sweetheart. I do. Yeah, I haven't checked out Happy Gnosis's YouTube channel. Check out her content. have two first names in one. Yeah, well, we'll have to have a talk with his parents. Marquis. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed the information on the death row and death penalty system here in the United States. I mean, I know it took me an awful long time to, to put the whole thing together, but this isn't the only one. I've gone down some of these, deep dives on death row inmates. And I got a list here. See, I write everything out in longhand. These are some additional, some bonus ones if you're still here, of inmates who were killed behind the prison walls, along with some of the ones that I already read. Colin Hatch, he was killed in 1994 in Yorkshire prison. Of course, I read off Billy Chemere, and I read off Billy Swanson, Edwin Caprat, Roger Kibble, the I-5 killer, Gerald John Schaefer. These are not all death row inmates. These were just inmates who were convicted of murder, sent to prison, and were doing either life or they were on death row. Donald Leroy Evans, James Whitey Bulger, the mob boss who was on the run and hiding out in plain sight in California. I think it was, or was it Arizona or something like that. Richard Loeb from Loeb and Leopold. Richard Loeb, he was murdered behind bars. May 21st, 1924, he was murdered. Loeb and Leopold, popular individual. How about Robert Del Salvo, the Boston Strangler? He was also the Green Man murderer, and he was the Beacon Hill killer. They thought that originally was 3 different murders, but it all turned out DNA later on that was tested well after he died. That was in the 1960s. He was murdered behind bars. He was actually beaten and stabbed, and of course, Jeffrey Dahmer. That's just some more inmates who died behind bars. Oh, so an additional interesting. So the United States military has an active signed declaration from Congress that allows them to use the death penalty. Every single branch of the United States military except the Space Force. The Space Force does not have an actual death penalty, part of their actual. But I'm pretty sure they're going to add it eventually, but they have to shake that out. But everything, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, they all have the death penalty as a possibility. The Moors murders used Leopold and Loeb as their inspiration. Well, thank you, Amber Pease, for putting Happy Gnosis' channel up there. I appreciate that. Great live stream. I'm going to research death row and prison. There you go, Francie. If nothing else, I hope that I was able to answer some questions about it. Yeah, so and make others curious about what goes on behind the those walls. I mean, it's insane that a lot of people believe that once they lock a prisoner up, the crime stops. No, they just move them from one place to another. They find another way, to get what they want, to use people, abuse people. So then we lock them up, and it's been proven over and over again, even in like county jails across the world. If you lock someone up and you give them no system of reform, actual repentance of, of what they've done wrong, showing them why they're doing these things or committing these acts, they're going to go back to them. And additionally, while they're in jail, they're going to learn new things on other crimes from other inmates. Maybe they're in for check fraud while they're in jail, the county jail there. And while they're there, they learn about hacking or stealing credit cards or spoofing accounts from another inmate. So now they come out, they learned something new, and it wasn't about repentance or making amends for what they did before. Now they got more information. Now they can become a bigger criminal if they. But of course, most criminals are idiots. But that was really interesting, especially as well. We no longer have the death penalty. And in the UK, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. The places that have done away with it, and when it comes to the prison system, I should probably do a whole live stream about the prison system in the UK and Ireland and Scotland. Because their approach to integration of the inmate, so they're not isolated away from the public, and is something that would definitely work more here in America, especially for non-violent criminals and crimes. If we had more of a policy like that, when someone here in the United States gets done with their sentence, they have their bag or plastic bag, or they have if they're lucky, they have a cardboard box with their belongings in it for all the time that they were in prison if they don't give them away. And we hand them a couple $100, and then they say, "We don't care how you get out of here. We're not even going to drive you to town." And most prisons are not located in the central, masses of cities anymore. They're located on the outskirts. Well, we'll give you a van ride from here to the diner down the road off the freeway, and then it's up to you to figure out where you go from here. And so they've been completely cut off from technology and family and everything else, and no chance of actually being able to get back on their feet. And then we cut them off from being able to get into low income housing. If you're a convicted felon, you may not be able to even go visit, stay at your mom's house if she's on Section 8, or your sister's, or if they're living in some kind of rent controlled apartment complex or home, that you can't be there because this states right in the paperwork you cannot be there if you're a convicted felon. And then we put it on job applications. If you're a felon, you must check this box and tell your possible new employer why or what felony offenses you had, what arrest you had. So we discriminate against them the moment they come out, and then we wonder why there's the revolving door. We don't give them a chance to be reformed, to make right for what they've done. And that's why so many of them just keep on going back, doing the same thing over and over again. It's pretty here. And they can't get a job and they can't get housing. Yep, that's true. And thanks to Ronald Reagan, and again, that's a fact, not a political statement or a bias against him. He did away with access to higher education and what can be provided loan-wise and study-wise for someone who has been convicted of a felony. They can get Pell Grants in some situations, but again, they must get approval from parole officers and probation officers and everything else, and they have to jump through all these other hoops. Plus, they must be paying on the restitution and everything else, and they have to do everything else that are requirements of their release. And then if they're doing that, they can apply for a Pell Grant to actually go to school to better their lives. And at any point they screw up on any one of these 17 things that are lined up in front of them since they got released, like you didn't show up on time for your parole hearing because We made it your parole hearing. You must be here at 4 o'clock and you don't get off until 5. That happens a lot. Unfortunately, we do things like that to trip them up. So, well, you can't have that job. You can't work 9 to 5 because you have to be here at your parole hearing at 4 o'clock because I need to get home to the suburbs and beat the traffic. Whatever the reason is, for it. But they do it. It's rigged. Just like so many other things in life. It's unfair. But then again, if you don't commit the crime, you don't have to do the time. And you don't have to worry about all these other things. So I don't feel bad for them. I'm not saying that somebody who commits a felony should get a free, pass to, and access to things that I can't get to, or my son or my daughter can't have. I'm not saying that at all. I'm thinking, we need to start and look at it how other countries have looked at the criminal justice system, and where have they made gains and what we are not doing here in America. We need to look at early childhood education, nutrition, and everything else. And we know if we do those things, it lowers the possibility of that child growing up and having to steal food to survive. They have to steal things to sell in order to feed their brother or sister or whoever. If we start educating them earlier and we give them the nutrition and services and access to schooling and everything else and mental health and physical health. Yeah, we have that with Medicare and stuff like that now, but you can't just blindly give, money to the mother who, only has like maybe a high school education and doesn't know how to do anything herself and expect that she's going to be able to lead her children out of poverty. How? Why would you do that? If you just throw money at it, it isn't going to do anything. It's like the meme, of Jesus and his disciples sitting on the mountaintop, and the one disciple turns to Jesus and says, "Can't we just give our money to the Romans so they can take care of the poor?" And Jesus looks back at his disciples and says, "All right, I'm going to start over again. Tell me where I lost you." It's a meme that goes around online, and it's true. Tim Jones Jr. Who's Tim Jones Jr.? Why am I not drawing anything to that cement shows? Who's Tim Jones? Tim Jones Jr. There are men's homes in town that provide housing and jobs for felons coming out of prison. They're over, Francie. There are over 100 national companies, businesses that actively hire and felons, people who've been convicted of felons. I mean, they're obviously not going to hire a bank robber or a thief to be the head of accounting, but they do offer some type of employment. Yeah, but over 100. I've seen the list on the After Prison Show. That's a YouTube channel, After Prison Show, with Joe Guerrero. I've seen that he put it up once a long time ago. But they're everything from fast food to hardware stores to national chains, not like independent ones from the Carolinas or Virginia, wherever the hell he lives. But he took his 5 children's lives on death row in South Carolina. Wow. Good morning, friendly talker. Canadians paid for Carla Holcomb so she could earn 2 degrees in jail. Maybe women are more favored. Here in the United States, in case you missed it, friendly talker, we have 41 women on death row right now in America, and only 1 woman has been executed in at any level at all in America since 1976. One. That was Elaine Wuornos. Nominate Anthony Todd. Haven't they done him? I'm gonna write them down, Cement Shoot, but I think I've done trivia night on Anthony before. But hey, just because I've done trivia on them before, doesn't mean that I won't do it again. Tyler Shaw business. Yeah, the only problem there with doing one on Taylor Shaw business is it would take longer for them to put that kind of trivia together, Cement, because you have to weed out all the speculation. Because if it's closer to now, you get all these people who hop onto it and they flood it full of made up facts and tidbits about it, and it takes longer to weed through all of them. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. It just takes longer. Good morning, Gayla. Give me a late slip. Well, Gayla, I'm actually going to wrap this up here, but I do wish and hope that you had a pleasant week, and thank you for stopping by. They're going to hire a bank robber to be in charge of the finance department, right? But once the national news news understood that crime in particular and things that happen in our day-to-day lives, once they realized, the national news realized that it was a profitable division of their actual reporting, they did away with reporters, and now they can get freelance journalists to do it, and they don't necessarily have to check the facts. And we've seen multiple times where these so-called freelance journalists have done stories on the war in Ukraine or a natural disaster, in Belize or wherever, and they never even left their damn living rooms, but they got paid to go there and do the story, and they never even left to go do it. They made everything up or garnered it all from the internet, and it's sad. Investigative journalism is dead on a national level. That nobody wants to be the next, Bob Woodward. No one wants to be the next, Walter Cronkite, or you can fill in a name there. They want the fame because they don't want to have to put in the legwork to get there. But thank you, everyone, for being here. I hope that everyone has a terrific day today and stay safe out there. And I will see, the vast majority, I hope, of you tomorrow for trivia night. Again, we are doing trivia on Charles Edmund Cullen, the Angel of Death. Charles Edmund Cullen. That is tomorrow night's trivia subject. But I hope that everyone has a great day today, and thank you again. Bye.